When I first laid eyes on the lake, it was nothing more than a muddy pit choked with weeds, algae, and rusted beer cans that had been left there for decades. The locals had long since abandoned it, whispering that it was nothing but a mosquito swamp, a failed water project no one wanted to claim responsibility for. But to me, it wasn't just a swamp, it was possibility. It was peace. It was a dream wrapped in mud and decay, waiting for someone stubborn enough, or maybe foolish enough, to care about it again. I had just come out of a hard chapter in my life. My business had survived a near collapse, my marriage hadn't, and I was searching for something that could ground me. Land has always spoken to me in a way that people rarely could, so when I found out about the abandoned lake on the edge of town, technically listed as unclaimed land, I jumped. I paid the fees, filed the deeds, and secured it legally under my name. Every last square foot of that waterlogged mess was mine. And so I went to work. At dawn, when most people were still asleep, I was there with clothes on, pulling out broken plastic chairs, tires, and even the husk of a rusted-out pickup truck that had sunk near the shore. By noon, I was cutting weeds taller than me, and by sunset, I was still knee-deep in muck, covered in mud, mosquitoes biting me raw. Day after day, I dug, trimmed, seeded, and hauled debris away in my old trailer. Neighbors passed by, shaking their heads. Some thought I was crazy. Others thought I'd quit after a week. But I didn't quit. Little by little, the swamp revealed its bones. Underneath all the filth, there was a natural spring feeding it, clean, cold, steady. I hired a small local crew to help dredge the bottom, installed drainage to stop flooding, and brought in fresh sand for the banks. Fish began to return, ducks circled the water, and the surface, once a blanket of slime, sparkled again under the sun. It wasn't long before the transformation caught everyone's attention. People began stopping by not to mock anymore, but to marvel. Kids rode their bikes past the water, pointing at the water, and families began asking if they could picnic near it. I didn't mind. It felt good knowing my work was being appreciated. I even built a simple dock, restored the walking trail that circled the shoreline, and planted willows along the edge. I was proud. I had taken something dead and brought it back to life. But pride, I would soon learn, is exactly what draws envy. The HOA came knocking. It started with a letter. The envelope was stuffed in my mailbox, stamped with the smug crest of the neighborhood's homeowners association. I wasn't part of the HOA. My property was legally outside their jurisdiction. I knew this because I had made damn sure of it before buying. Still, the letter read like a declaration of conquest. Dear resident, it has come to our attention that the lake adjoining the Willow Ridge subdivision is being utilized and restored. As this body of water constitutes a shared natural resource under the covenant of the association, its maintenance and oversight are under the rightful jurisdiction of the HOA. I laughed at first, a short, sharp laugh that left me shaking my head. They hadn't lifted a single finger. They hadn't hauled one rusted tire or swatted one mosquito. Yet now that the lake was beautiful again, they wanted it. I ignored the letter. But ignoring them only made them louder. A week later, 3 board members showed up at my property line, dressed in golf shirts and clipboards, like they were corporate generals inspecting their conquest. Their leader, a sharp-eyed woman named Marjorie, who had the smile of someone who'd never been told no, introduced herself as president of the HOA. "We need to discuss the lake," she said. I leaned on my shovel, sweat dripping down my neck, and said evenly, "There's nothing to discuss. The lake's mine." Her smile faltered. "It belongs to the HOA. It always has. The documents stop right there." I pulled a folded copy of my deed from my pocket. I always carried it because I knew something like this was coming. I waved it in her face. "This says otherwise. It's mine. I paid for it. I restored it. End of story." The other board members shifted uncomfortably, but Marjorie wasn't deterred. "We'll see about that," she said coolly. "The association has resources. We'll make sure this misunderstanding is corrected." She turned and marched off, her little army trailing behind her. That was the day I knew a war had started. They began with intimidation, letters stuffed in my mailbox, all threatening legal action. Then came the phone calls, anonymous numbers leaving messages about how I was trespassing on community property. Then the flyers distributed around the neighborhood, painting me as some selfish loner who had stolen their lake. I didn't flinch. But the real escalation came one Saturday morning when I found an entire group of HOA members setting up tables, banners, and chairs on my dock. They were holding an official community event by the water. They hadn't asked. They hadn't notified me. They had simply decided my lake was theirs. I marched down to the dock, my boots heavy on the wood. "This is private property," I said, my voice low but steady. A balding man with sunglasses sneered at me. "It's community property. You can't keep us from using it." I pointed to the deed posted on a wooden board by the dock, laminated and nailed for all to see. "Read it, then pack up." Marjorie stood up, her smile weaponized. "You don't want to make enemies of the neighborhood, do you?" "I don't want to make anything," I snapped. "I want you off my land." For a moment, silence. Then murmurs, then defiance. They didn't leave until I called the sheriff, and when the deputies arrived, they sided with me because the law was clear. But that only made the HOA hate me more. They filed a lawsuit within a month. Their claim was weak, but they had money, and they knew how to drag things out. Court dates, paperwork, endless motions designed to bleed me dry. They wanted me to surrender out of exhaustion. But they underestimated me. I wasn't just fighting for a lake, I was fighting for the principle of it. For every hour of sweat I had poured into that soil, every bucket of muck I had hauled out with my bare hands. This wasn't just land, it was my redemption, and I wasn't about to let a pack of bureaucrats take it. The courtroom battles became a war of attrition. Their lawyer, a slick man in expensive suits, spat legal jargon meant to confuse and overwhelm me. But I had done my homework. I brought every document, every receipt, every photo of the work I had done. I turned their arrogance into my weapon. The judge wasn't fooled. Case by case, hearing by hearing, the HOA lost ground. But Marjorie wasn't the kind of woman to accept defeat gracefully. When legal threats failed, she tried sabotage. I found trash dumped by the lake again, graffiti sprayed across the dock. Once someone even cut the ropes to my boats, letting them drift away. But each time I rebuilt, stronger, cleaner, better. And slowly, the tide began to turn. The community, the very people the HOA claimed to represent, started to see through the lies. They remembered what the lake used to be, a swamp they all avoided. They saw what I had done with it, a place of life and beauty. Neighbors began siding with me, offering quiet words of support, even testifying in court on my behalf. The more they pushed, the more they revealed their greed. The more I stood, the more respect I earned. And when the breaking point finally came, it wasn't in a courtroom, it was at a meeting. The HOA had gathered in their clubhouse, smug as ever, ready to announce yet another community motion to seize my property. But this time, the room wasn't on their side. The residents had gathered in force, and they were tired of the lies. I stood at the back silent as Marjorie tried to spin her speech. She talked about protecting shared resources and ensuring community benefit. But each word landed flatter than the last. Murmurs turned to grumbles, grumbles to shouts. People demanded proof, demanded answers. And then I walked to the front. I laid down photos, before and after. I laid down receipts. I laid down the deed. And then I looked Marjorie dead in the eye. You didn't care about the lake when it was a swamp. You didn't care when it was choking with trash. You didn't care when it was dying. I did. And now you want to steal it because it's beautiful again. That's not community. That's greed. The room erupted, not with applause, but with the kind of angry agreement that destroys regimes. By the end of that night, the board was fractured.
Their own neighbors had turned against them. But Marjorie, she wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Because for people like her, power isn't just control, it's survival. And she'd rather burn everything down than let me win. And I knew as I walked out of that room that the war for the lake had only just begun.
The weeks after that stormy HOA meeting felt like the calm before a hurricane. On the surface, things seemed quieter. The flyers stopped, the late-night phone calls disappeared, and no one dared dump trash on my property again. For a moment, I even let myself believe it was over, that maybe the crowd's anger had forced Marjorie and her cronies to retreat. But people like her don't retreat, they regroup. I learned that the hard way one morning when I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery outside my window. At first, I thought it was road work, but when I stepped onto the porch, my stomach turned. Excavators, trucks, workers in neon vests, and right there, tearing through the soil at the far end of the lake, was a bulldozer. I sprinted across the field, shouting until my throat burned. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" A foreman waved a clipboard at me, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "We're under contract with the Willow Ridge HOA. This land has been authorized for a community recreation project. Walking paths, gazebos, water access." "Authorized by who?" I barked. "The HOA president, signed and sealed." I snatched the paper from his hands. Sure enough, there it was, Marjorie's signature, bold and smug, like she owned the place. My property, my lake. "You touch one more inch of this ground, and I'll have every one of you arrested for trespassing," I growled.
The workers hesitated. Some shuffled nervously. The foreman muttered something about calling their boss. Within minutes, the machines fell silent. But the damage was done. A gash of torn-up earth scarred the shoreline, the first step in what was clearly a bigger plan. That was when I knew Marjorie wasn't just trying to scare me anymore. She was trying to erase me. I went back to court immediately, filing an emergency injunction. The judge granted it, stating clearly that the HOA had no right to develop land they didn't own. For the moment, the machine stopped, but I could see in Marjorie's cold stare across the courtroom that she wasn't beaten. She was just getting desperate. And desperate people are dangerous. The next few months turned into a chess game. She tried every trick in the book, petitioning the county to rezone the land, filing false environmental claims to have my restoration projects deemed illegal, even whispering rumors that my deed was forged. Each time I countered with facts, documents, and witnesses. Each time she lost more credibility. But still she clawed and scraped, refusing to let go. And then came her biggest mistake. One chilly morning in early spring, I came down to the lake to check on the new saplings I'd planted. What I found made my blood boil. Every tree, every single one had been cut down in the night. Stumps and splinters lined the bank, fresh sawdust still clinging to the air. It wasn't kids, it wasn't vandals. It was deliberate, organized, and I knew exactly who was behind it. I didn't call the sheriff this time. I called a lawyer, a real fighter, the kind of man who smelled blood in the water and sharpened his teeth for it. Together, we began building a case, not just to defend myself, but to take the fight directly to them. We dug into the HOA's finances, and what we uncovered was dirtier than the swamp the lake used to be. Misused funds, falsified expense reports, unauthorized contracts. Marjorie had been running the HOA like her personal kingdom, skimming and pocketing along the way. The irony was almost poetic. In trying to steal my lake, she had exposed her own rot. But I didn't rush. No, revenge is best served slow, with patience and precision.
I let her keep fighting, keep making noise, keep digging her own grave. All the while, my lawyer gathered evidence. Residents whispered rumors louder, and the tension built like a storm cloud. The breaking point came during the annual HOA election. Marjorie strutted into that meeting like a queen ready to be crowned again. Her allies clapped, her enemies muttered, and the room buzzed with unease. She launched into her speech about vision and community stewardship, painting herself as the savior of the neighborhood. And then I walked in. Not a resident, not a voter, but holding a thick folder under my arm. The room went quiet. Every eye turned to me. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I simply laid the folder on the table, opened it, and began reading aloud. Line after line, expense after expense, false claims, misuse of dues, illegal authorizations, photos of the cut trees, affidavits from workers who'd been pressured into trespassing, bank statements that didn't add up. By the time I finished, Marjorie's face was pale as chalk. The residents erupted. Some shouted for her resignation. Others demanded an investigation. The board scrambled to distance themselves. Within an hour, Marjorie's reign was over. Voted out in disgrace, facing not only civil suits, but criminal charges. But I wasn't done. With her gone, the new board was eager to make peace. They offered to share the lake, to collaborate on projects. I refused. I didn't restore the lake for them. I restored it for me, for the land, for anyone who wanted to enjoy it without strings or greed. So I made it untouchable. I placed the lake into a private land trust under my name, with a clause ensuring it could never be claimed or developed by any outside entity, not the HOA, not the county, not anyone. I built a fence, not to keep people out, but to keep vultures like Marjorie from circling again. And then I opened it on my own terms, a sanctuary, free to the public, but owned and protected by me alone. The final blow came when the local paper ran the story. HOA president ousted in lake scandal, the headline read. The article painted me not as the villain Marjorie had tried to portray, but as the man who had saved a dying lake and exposed corruption in the process. Neighbors who once doubted me now stopped by with gratitude. Kids fished off the dock again. Families picnicked in the shade of the willows I replanted. And the lake, my lake, shimmered in the sunlight, alive and free. As for Marjorie, she vanished. Rumor had it she'd moved out of town after the charges piled up. Her reputation in tatters, her kingdom reduced to rubble. I didn't care where she went. All I cared was that she was gone. Standing on the dock one evening, watching the sunset ripple across the water, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Hard-earned, scarred by battles, but real. The HOA had tried to steal what I built. They tried to break me. Instead, I broke them. Because some things can't be stolen. Some things are earned. Sweat, blood, grit. And this lake was mine. Forever.